This conference will now be recorded.
All right, it is 8 o'clock. We'll begin the work session for the Sioux County Board. Please silence your cell phones and stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Because of today's agenda, let's try and stay on task and end this at no later than 9:15.
That sounds great, sir. So to begin with, commissioners, we're going to walk through, Mr. Howard's going to walk through the last few years of the aquatic weed harvesting program. If you recall, when at the inception of this effort, the commissioners committed to a 3-year program. And we have now passed that 3-year program in terms of harvest seasons. So it behooves us to go back to you and show what that looks like. Maybe talk about what's being accomplished, what isn't being accomplished perhaps. And then get your perspective and understanding of what funding may look like going forward should this program be continuing. So I'll turn it over to Chris and he can walk through some of the handouts that he has for you.
Good morning.
Morning.
So Michael said we're going to recap the last 3 years of the wheat harvest program and what we've accomplished and try and gauge where we're going. The illustration that Michael has on the screen was the 2024 permit, and what that will show you is there was 2 areas in there in the northwest corner of the lake that were chemical treatment, and those areas were chemically treated by the Lakes Association. The southern portion was what we were permitted for mechanical harvesting, and all of those red dots in there were results of a weed survey that was part of getting the permit every year. We have a contractor go out and they look for curly leaf pondweed and the amount of it. And so, long story short, the smaller the red dot, the less dense the pondweed is, and the bigger the dot is, the denser it is. And so that was our 2024 map. Michael, if you would go to the next one, please. So that was the permitted area, and within that dark squiggly mess is the tracking from the harvester itself. And out of that 130 acres, we harvested 100 acres, and a lot of it repeatedly. We would start cutting the pondweed, and we would go back, and it would either grow back and regenerate, or there would be portions we would miss. So a lot of times we were canvassing the same area over and over, just trying to get it all. So this year, we actually harvested, we began May 20th and we ended June 18th, and we had about 18 working days. And when it ends really quickly. Within a matter of 2 to 3 days, the pondweed just disappears. This year we harvested 159 truckloads, a little over 213 ton, and the productivity, which was viewed either as good or bad, was up significantly from last year when we harvested 40 loads of 60 ton. First year in 2022, we harvested 200 loads. And so we've kind of been on a roller coaster, and a lot of that, I think, is due to weather conditions, rain, the amount of rain, nutrients getting into Clear Lake. But, the way that it was described to us, Sika County from the DNR and the AIS specialist, is that we needed to do 3 years of harvesting to start to deter or to slow the spread of curly leaf pond. To gauge what the future looks like, if we're gaining on it or not, is kind of a hard thing to predict. I was hopeful that we were going to be on the downward swing of it coming into the 2024 season, but apparently that proved to be incorrect. But with that being said, the harvesting is removing weed seeds from the water, and I guess in the end that is the idea. If we remove the seed head from the plant, we're slowing or deterring the propagation of the plant. And so if you would ask my opinion, this is kind of going to be an ongoing maintenance item, almost like mowing your lawn. I don't think that we will ever eradicate it, but we can keep it at bay, and we can make the lake more usable for recreational purposes. We have areas, if you notice on the permit, we're not allowed to get so close to the shoreline because the Department of Natural Resources does not want us getting up close and damaging any native vegetation that may exist. And so they're keeping us at least 150 feet away from the shoreline. And all of you that farm know that if you have a field and you spray the center of the field and not the edges of it, and let the weeds grow on the edges, what happens when you quit spraying the center of the field? It just encroaches back in. And I believe that the concept is the same here. And so in 2022, we had an exorbitant cost. We factored in the cost of the equipment, repairing the equipment to get it into usable shape. We prepared a receiving site for the curly leaf pondweed. We had some additional labor costs, and the first year, as you know, it was a little over $500,000 that was spent in that program. In 2023, we had spent $35,058. This year, we spent $35,795. So within dollars of what was spent between 23 and 24. In 2023, we had a large scale repair. This year we had to replace an engine on the transport barge. This year we didn't have any major repairs, but we had more labor, more fuel, more productivity. So, it just kind of evened out the load. Michael's displaying kind of a breakdown, and that is the same handout that I put in front of you, showing the cost of the repairs, supplies, fuel, labor, and also the tonnage and the loads that were hauled out. So to date, we have about $585,000 invested in the program. Like I said, the first year, I believe was 513, and then the aggregate of 2023, 2024. I'm visiting with Michael yesterday, we talked about, we have some ideas, and we also wish to see if this is a program that the board wishes to see go forward. I kind of feel that using 2023 and 4 as a gauge for cost, I would probably bolster that a little bit for some unforeseens. Those are big boy toys, and if you have a failure of a component, that can change in a hurry. So, if we would kind of use the, a $40,000, $45,000 a year budget for it, I would hope that over the course of the coming years, it would kind of average your way itself out. I'm talking to Michael. I have talked to the city of Waseca a little bit and asked if there would be a possibility of having them aid either in some way, shape, or form, whether that be in terms of labor or monetary. And it sounds like in talking to staff that there would be a possibility of doing so. The city of Waseca has been budgeting so much for lake improvement projects per year, and that money is went towards spraying their swimming beaches, and last year they contributed to the Lakes Association for doing some of the chemical treatment, as did Waseca County, and providing a monetary donation to Lakes Association. But in talking to staff of the city of Waseca, they felt that it would be something that they would talk with the city manager about and bring it before council and see if they would be willing to participate. The challenges that we run into going forward is, it is a very short season, and getting temporary or summer staff to come and work for a month may be challenging going forward. And my first train of thought was I was hoping that we would be able to maybe garner some help from the city of Waseca in terms of staffing, but I don't think that that's going to happen. Last year we manned it with a couple of our staff and a couple part-time seasonal help. One of the individuals has been with us all 3 years, but he's since graduated college and won't be able to come back next year, so we'll kind of be starting fresh. And whether, we get any applicants or not for it, should we choose to go temporary again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it may prove to be challenging. So, over the course of the last 3 years, we've harvested a total of 399 truckloads, a little over 500 ton of material, and we've covered about 325 acres. Everyone that I have talked to has been excited and positive, and feel that it is a step forward for the city of Waseca and Waseca County in general. We've had very few critical reviews of the process. The first year that we started, we had some questions from some fishermen and an individual that worked for the fisheries department with the DNR. But since that time, we've had really no one who has objected to what we're doing.
They concerned about harvesting the fish too?
There's a couple of people that will look as we're unloading, and there's a few fish in there, and not everyone, but they will ask the question that, when I see, a couple of fish in there, and, it's been questioned a time or two, but no one has really ever raised too much of a stink, I guess, for lack of better terms. And that's kind of an incidental that we don't, care to see. And the operators of the equipment are pretty conscientious. We scoop up some turtles from time to time, and if they see them coming up onto the machine, they'll get off and they'll set them back off, or they'll release them, or if we happen to get a trophy fish or a large fish, they'll do their best to get it back in the water. So, I try and do what we can, but the majority of the fish that we do get are, tiny bluegills or sunfish that are
Don't to get out of the way.
Right, try to sit up there and yell at them all they want, but they don't move. They're like kids. So. But it's, the equipment is in pretty good shape. We have a fair amount of parts on the shelf yet. Unfortunately, it's almost more work getting the thing ready and getting it moved out and getting it in the water and getting it back out of the water and put back on jack stands than it is to do the job. But that is part of it. And that's what we signed up for.
Chair? Question?
Yeah.
You're talking about putting it in the water and getting it out of the water. I know way back when we first started talking about this, we talked about the lakes in the county that we needed, and we quickly came to the conclusion that Clear Lake was a great place to start. I know that there are some needs other places in the county, but not as great a need as Clear Lake showed, and that's one of the reasons we started with Clear Lake. Is there a reason to think about using this on any other lakes?
So it is a possibility, and not to say that any of the constituents of the county have not reached out to yourselves or Michael, but I personally have not had a lakes association that has came to me and said, we're interested, we feel that there's a need, we would like to see this come to Reeds or St. Olaf or any of these other lakes. Not to say, the only interest that I've had at this point in time is when we get a large winter kill such as Lake Legion and there's carp floating all over. And they've asked or inquired, if that machine would be capable of picking up dead fish from the surface of the water. And it is a possibility, but, when that had happened in 2023, the winter of 22, 23, by the time that anyone even asked, it was almost too late to come and visit with you about if we want to enter into a venture like that. And then we would have to alter the equipment a little bit to make it feasible to pick the fish up and come up with a plan what to do with them. So, that kind of passed us by. Now, I guess getting back to using it on other lakes, curly leaf pondweed is a weed that grows at the same time in our region and every lake. And if we choose to go to one lake or the other, whatever lake that we're not working on is the lake that's getting skipped that year. I think, the decision was made to do a 3-year program on Clear Lake to give it some repetitiveness and to give it a chance to see how it responds. Not to say that we can't choose another lake, but at this point in time, I have not had any requests to do anything anywhere else, with the exception of, Reeds Lake this past year. We've entered into a grant with them to do a multi-year fluoride treatment that will start this fall. But, when we visited with them about mechanical harvesting, we really didn't get any response or any desire to do so from the Lakes Association.
Yeah, I've had the St. Olaf Lake Association talk to me about, actually ask annually on how it's going with the weed harvester and if it's a possibility to get it down there. So, last year, this Carly was working for the DNR. And she went out and did a survey of the lake, but it was late in the season, it was August. So Curly Pond Leaf would have already been dead and down.
Right.
And what she discovered, what she said is the lake is very healthy, and it's got native weeds in there. It's not, coontail was prevalent,
Yeah.
and that's what's causing a lot of the concern on the lake, because it's growing, it goes out so far, so it's interferes with docks and lifts and stuff like that. In talking to her, it sounds like if it's just that weed you're going after, then that's not a invasive weed. And you would need recreational permits. Each owner would have to have recreational permits in front of their place to clean that up. And so I don't know that we want to enter into anything like that. That's more of a private business in my mind. But there's also reports, other reports that claim that there is pond leaf in that lake. So I don't know, what I'm wondering is, do we need to have the DNR inspect that lake like they do with Clear Lake for us to permit it? Do we need to have that done in St. Olaf to actually figure out if we
How
can
much
use?
is there in the density of it?
Yeah,
Sorry.
right, and where it is, or,
So kind of the history on the relationship with the DNR and the Lakes Associations is the first year, Carly, the AIS specialist for the DNR, did the weed survey for Clear Lake. And, she was surveying for curly leaf pondweed, but she was also surveying for all of the other native species that were in the lake to make sure that we weren't going to do more collateral damage getting up the pondweed than we were doing good. After she did that initial survey, then it's been up to either the Lakes Association or Waseca County to provide the survey going forward. The weed survey is not something that the DNR typically does as a service, as a prerequisite to get a aquatic plant management permit. And so, now that Carly has been out there once, if we were interested in surveying for curly leaf pondweed in the spring of the year, it would probably be up to us to get a contractor out there to do a survey.
and so there are private contractors that you can hire to do that survey?
Correct. Last year, we hired a company called Edge Aquatic Services, and they did the survey of Clear Lake. That was about $1,200. And that was taking 200 plus survey points. And they did it in less than a day. And then they'll go back and they will give you the results, the densities, they'll overlay it on a map and show you, where it was found, where it's thickest or most prevalent. And then you use, or we, I should say, will take that shape file that they provide us and then we use that in our permitting to get our permit for.
Okay, so that's how it goes. You would get that results from them, and then you would take that to the DNR and say, we need a permit to
Correct.
harvest this.
Correct. And so, if you would like, we can work with the Lakes Association or the individuals that, have been asking about it. And, to my knowledge, St. Olaf Lake has not really made any asks from Waseca County through the AIS fund. The AIS fund has been, helping to support Clear Lake, and we're giving to Reed's Lake. And it's a fund that is here for aquatic invasive species for all lakes in the county. And so if they have an ask, they should get with us and we can try.
I did bring that up to him also. I said, I didn't know if they were doing any spraying and say no, any control there. And, because, yeah, they haven't asked us for any funds. So that's.
And, sometimes it may be a communication problem that maybe they don't know that there are funds available. Last year, Commissioner Malter and I went and sat down with the Lake Elysian Lakes Association and, trying to get the word out that there is money out there in different forms, but the Lakes Associations also need to make the ask, and tell us what they want. So, I guess kind of where we're at is, if we have any initial thoughts on if this is a program that we're going to continue and, how we're going to fund it and where the equipment will go going forward. At this point in time, I believe that it would probably be best suited to stay in Clear Lake if there's no one else who has made a formal ask to do anything with it, unless we can get out there and we can do the research and kind of provide the evidence saying that it's needed, But this next year would probably tell me at a lake such as St. Olaf Lake, we would spend the spring surveying and getting the paperwork, and so maybe it would be a 2026 harvesting effort if pondweed is to be found and there's enough there to warrant going after. That would give us some time to work through the permitting and the homework to do so. But, Clear Lake the last couple of years has looked really well. And, it's a combination of the mechanical harvesting and the Floridone treatment that was done to control the Eurasian milfoil. So it's been beneficial, but we also need to keep in mind that if the Eurasian milfoil does come back, that the Eurasian milfoil is going to have to be addressed immediately, because Eurasian milfoil will take over very quickly if it's not addressed when it's found. And also just keep in mind that Eurasian milfoil cannot be mechanically harvested. That has to be chemically treated. With Eurasian milfoil, it's almost like a hosta or another plant. You can break one plant into 30 pieces and now you will have 30 Eurasian milfoil plants. In the state of Wisconsin, they are harvesting Eurasian milfoil with mechanical harvesters, but they're set up over there where a lake of this size may have 2 harvesters and they just harvest all summer long like mowing a lawn, and that is their method of controlling it. But in Minnesota, the Department of Natural Resources does not feel that that is a viable option.
So the crux of this conversation also then is budgetary in nature, right? So it's, Chris did a good job of putting together roughly what the ask is going to be, near about $40,000 at this point in time. The investment has already been made into the program. The sustainability of the program isn't that big of a deal, but it's still something that Ford has to be interested in, and we need to factor into the budgetary program. We've been paying with it with federal dollars over the last 3 years. When this was originally devised, the board denoted a certain chunk of federal dollars to pay for these 3 years, which obviously has not been done. So if we take this on, we'll look to shift that $40,000 as part of the whether it lands in land and water resources or wherever, it doesn't really matter, but as part of that general fund picture going forward. So that's the other part of the ask, the history of the program, and also going forward, is the board okay absorbing that cost?
But I think we need to get some kind of a cost share, whether it's Lake Association or city. You know, we need to get some help. I wouldn't be opposed to putting dollars toward it if we're getting help from other places.
Thank you, Commissioner Christopherson. And I absolutely agree. It's Clear Lake is an important lake in our county, partly because it is in the city of Waseca and has lots of residents that enjoy it on a daily basis. But it isn't the only lake. And so I agree that some skin in the game by the city or the Lakes Association would be appropriate, not only on Clear Lake, but on any lake we go to. We need the folks who are on that lake to be invested in the process as well, and to be willing to put some skin in the game. But I also think we do have to look at those other lakes as well. Discussion about both St. Olaf and Reed's Lake, they're the two unimpaired lakes, officially unimpaired, that we have as far as, state standards. They're both called out as important lakes and lakes of significance in our one watershed, one plan, the Sewer River. And so I don't know if there's any nexus there as far as, obviously invasive species dollars aren't called out in one watershed, one plan, but I don't know if there's any other way to think about those resources.
Sure.
But I think it would be a mistake to not do the homework in a holistic way for the county lakes.
No, and I agree. And, I've had a setback in our watershed coordinator. The watershed coordinator, as you know, was just starting to make some of those relationships with those local lakes associations, and then he chased another opportunity, which I don't blame him for, but so now we're kind of starting over, and so now we need to get back out there and meet the neighbors again, and start to build those relationships and educate the lakes associations of what is available, and what we need them to do to just tell us what they're looking for, to see if we can be of assistance to them, and for us to tell them what is available for resources to them. So it's the Clear Lake Lakes Association has been, very involved, and they're passionate about it, and they've assisted in helping us with our permitting for Clear Lake. We have to notice all the residents of the lake as part of the permitting process, and they put our notice in the newsletter every year, which meets the statutory requirement of noticing all the residents of the lake. And going forward, conversations have been had about, if we can form a joint powers agreement with the Lakes Association, maybe try and lean on them to aid us in some of the labor demands that we have of running the equipment. So there are possibilities out there, and things that we will work towards. It's just, before we enter too far down that road, we wanted to get a general consensus of what the board felt about the program in general. And, we will continue to work with the Lakes Associations in the city of Waseca to see, what we can get from a buy-in perspective from them, but at least we're coming to you with a worst case scenario of, saying that it's about $40,000 a year to maintain the program as it stands. There is a possibility of a small contribution out of the AIS fund to contribute towards this, and we'll continue to look for other opportunities or grant opportunities, but just trying to let you know where we're at and where we're going and what the immediate need will be if we cannot find anything else.
Chris, I do agree with Commissioner Malter and Christopherson on, the Lakes Association on the other 3 lakes besides Clear. I don't know what that would look like if you were on a rotational, at least for Janesville and Waseca, because we don't know about Reeds yet and we don't know about St. Olo. So that would be.
I don't think, if I'm recalling, this was 3 years ago that we looked at this, because we looked at where the biggest need was. And because it's curly leaf pondweed, it seems to me that I'm recalling that wasn't such a big issue in Elysian, partly because Elysian is so shallow. That Clear Lake obviously came to the forefront as the biggest need, not only because it was a larger lake in a more densely populated area, but also that it had more of a problem with curly leaf pondweed. But I don't know how that's changed in 3 years, so.
Right, and that's kind of the question, and it would be tough to say, because if you have a winter like we had last year, and that all affects what comes back.
Right.
If you were, and this is all hypothetical, if you were to not go back onto Clear Lake for a year, are you losing those 3 years that you were out there? That's, and the problem is say they had a fish kill on Lake Elysian that we may look into. You've already tried to figure out Clear Lake and what they're going to let us do. It's not like, hey, you can run over there for an afternoon and then come back. That's the larger portion.
Yeah, and definitely take some planning, and when you dedicate yourself to a lake for a year, you're kind of going to be tied to it. And, that equipment in its current state is not easily transportable. And there's some challenges, in the oversized, overweight categories there. So at this point in time, traveling any great distance down the road, is something that we have to look at. But, it can be done. And we'll just make a point of it here over the next few months to get out and talk to those lakes associations and see, what they would like us to do. We have been, Reeds Lake specifically, we've been in contact with them and been working through, their ask. We have talked about the aquatic weed harvest program, but their ask specifically was for the Eurasian milfoil treatment, the Floridone treatment. They said they want to say they don't care about the curly leaf pondweed, but their focus was on Eurasian milfoil. And so they're well aware of, that we have the equipment and the capability of doing it, but in all of our previous discussions, the ask was never made to address the curly leaf pondweed. But we definitely can touch base with the other lakes associations and find out, what their immediate needs are and what, let them know what is available to them. And we will have some further discussions with the DNR AIS specialist as well to find out, what happens if we take a break, from harvest for a calendar year and go to another lake and then come back, and I don't know if there is a lot of factual data out there that, it's, in talking with Carly in the past, this isn't something that the department deals in on a daily basis, and I don't know what kind of statistics they have on curly leaf pondweed, so.
Is Eric our ally in that, or is he in a completely different department now?
He's in a different department. He's in watershed health.
Yeah.
So we still touch base and talk from time to time, but no, he is not in a position to work with us on this particular problem anyway.
Other questions for Chris?
The dump truck, eventually Land and Water will have a truck.
Eventually,
Rental
yes.
won't be there. But
Yeah, and what you saw in there, the rent from the dump truck was something, the first year in 2022, the highway department was providing the truck, the operator, and the fuel. And so, the costs for the dump truck the first year were a little bit higher, and we were also busier. Last year and this year, we kind of came to an agreement of just reimbursing them on a per load type basis because the program was taking care of the fuel and the operators, so we're just using the truck. But it is the intent that we will be receiving a truck from the highway department when their new one finally gets outfitted and gets here. But, bearing that in mind, just because there's a dump truck within Land and Water Resources doesn't necessarily mean that truck runs for free either. It still costs something to maintain it and keep it on the road, but hopefully we can work on that cost a little bit as well.
yeah, I don't have any problem putting dollars into this program. I mean, and moving forward, asking from residents or the Lake Association or other groups that would put money towards this, because our investment has had a benefit to the whole community out there. So, and we've done it for 3 years, and now going into the 4th year, I feel like we've proved ourselves. We can start asking for a little bit of help in that way. I would be a little bit worried about not doing it continually every year, because if it is like a field with weeds, you skip 1 year, it could look very ugly. And then the residents are out there going, well, where's the weed harvester this year? They're in the mood now of seeing it every year. And it's like, okay, good, it's out there, now we can go swimming, kids can swim the shore or whatever is going on the house. So I hate to not do it every year, but I still feel supportive of looking at the other lakes also. So.
With that being said, some of the other lakes too, a lot of them are considerably smaller in acreage. And, if after the survey is done, if the curly leaf pondweed is concentrated in certain areas, there are possibilities that maybe we could do chemical treatments on some of those other lakes to try and work on the problem spots rather than hauling all that equipment, down to a 100-acre lake, to harvest 30 acres of curly leaf pondweed. Maybe we could chemically treat some of that. And, just like on Clear Lake, the chemical treatment, it alters permit areas according to where the densities of the curly leaf pondweed is. Last year, that chemical treatment area looked a lot different than it does this year. It was all either in the northwest corner or straight out from Sportsman's Park or the golf club. And, and you can see by the map, some of that chemical treatment straight out from the swimming beach out there seem to have an effect because the densities are shrinking, and not to say that they're not going to come back, but it's temporarily worked anyway. So it's a maintenance thing, it's like maintaining your lawn, but your lawn is below the surface of the water. Harvesting weeds and spraying weeds and trying to keep them from propagating. So,
Well, I think generally speaking, Lake Legion really doesn't have a weed problem. The carp seem to rough that up pretty good. I mean, we can't even get cattails to grow on that lake. So, but Reed's Lake, now on the other hand, the problem is getting the paddle wheel down there. And that landing would be, it would be a very, I mean, it can be done, but I mean, it'd be a tough goal.
Yeah, it'd definitely be more challenging. I mean, it is doable. I mean, we can get it in there. I'm confident in that.
And I think the smaller lakes are easier to deal with chemicals than we have to move the whole paddle boat back onto those lakes. I mean, I think if we go into this fourth year, we see a significant benefit on the lake, and that's where we're going to see our. But I would really like to see some people throw their little skin in the game.
And, with that being said, I will continue that conversation with the city. And like I say, I don't want to speak for them, but in the conversation that I've had with staff, they sounded positive that that's something that could go through the city manager and the council, and they could allocate some of their existing budget dollars. Like they say, they budget X amount of dollars every year and kind of have a handle of what they've been spending. And there seems to be some excess left at the end of the day that could transfer over to this program. But, that is definitely something that council would have to be behind.
Is there anything from soil and water that could help us out on budgetary?
In my conversations with Mark Shatsky, nothing has came to light. Let's not say that we definitely want to still continue to research that. It seems like grant opportunities kind of come from all different angles and sources, and that would be our goal, was to try and to fund this with as little levy impact as possible. But we just have to continue searching for those funding sources and see what is viable.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Any other? We're good?
But just to clarify my understanding of the position, I'm anticipating budgeting for the amount of the program for 2025. And we are still going to continue the conversations with the other organizations and agencies to find whatever funding sources and partnerships we can, but to ensure that the programs roll in 2025.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, a couple other things. September 3rd is when we will have extension, soil and water, and some additional public health updates. So that work session prior to the meeting on that particular date. Just so you have that in your mind, those were kind of three of the takeaways from our last conversation. So Christy and Mark will be set up to be with us on September 3rd. And then we'll break down a little bit more in public health maybe next week too, and just breaking down those numbers a little bit more. We were talking about that couple $100,000 increase, how that was impacted between the loss of revenues and how all of those things are shifting. One additional staff from 2024 going into 2025. So just connecting all of those dots in a little bit more detail. And wanted to spend a couple of minutes on talking about potential project collaboration with the city. They attended their EDA meeting, the City of Waseca's EDA meeting last Wednesday. Waseca Real Estate Fund was doing a presentation at that meeting specific to the marketplace property. Effectively what their ask is of City of Waseca, City of Waseca EDA, Waseca County and Waseca County EDA, or all of the above, is help with the funding shortfall of $500,000 to make that project go. A couple of months ago, if you recall, that number was a little north of $1 million. They were able to generate some additional funds. Where the 500,000 comes from is essentially what is anticipated to be generated in tax increment financing over the life of the district, and then what the bank is actually willing to credit based upon that anticipated. So there's a little bit of risk factor in there. So they look at 75-ish%, and the bank is willing to provide a note that covers about 75% of anticipated increment, assuming if something goes wrong and we don't get paid back, here's what we're willing to cover. So the difference of that 1.6 and the 1.1 that the bank is willing to notate is what their ask is. So my subsequent ask of the commissioners, in just terms of conversation, obviously not making any decisions today, but what the appetite is to partner in that conversation. The only commitment to that space that I made was a commitment of having conversation. We're always willing to collaborate where it makes sense to collaborate. In this instance, it is a two-phase plan. RAF is very interested in the construction of two different buildings. The second building would likely look a little bit different than the first. This first one is further away from the road, being Highway 13. The council and the council representatives, as well as the EDA board, stated their desire to look at something in reference to a couple of properties in Mankato being constructed where there is some a commercial and retail presence on the lower level and housing apartments on the upper levels. So REF was not deterred by that and is willing to look at that. I guess they have a current project they're doing in Mankato, Rivosity and or REF. So Rivosity is kind of the parent group, funding group, if you will, based out of Northfield. Waseca Real Estate Fund is a group of individuals that partners with Rivosity. So it's all local dollars. That's kind of their shtick, if you will, that they're taking local dollars and plugging them back into the community from which they're raised income from. So all that to say, they cut about 50% off of what the original ask would have been. After the meeting, I talked to Chris and Mark from Rivosity briefly, and just future opportunities potentially through the local housing trust fund, waiting to get some clarification from the state there as well. Well, as far as I know, we haven't gotten any more clarification from the state, I should say, on what level of opportunity for matching would be available through that program. Why that matters in this is because it potentially has the ability to extend investor dollars if investment dollars or in dollars from the county are invested through that local housing trust fund. There's a multiplication factor that can be applied. So dollar for dollar a match, for example, up to $150,000 and 50 cents on the dollar after that, to a certain extent. Those are the funding guarantees, I guess, if you will, that we're waiting to get clarification on from the state. So we're not really talking about local housing trust fund right now in terms of this project, unless something changes quickly. But ultimately, my desire is to figure out where the board rests on this particular conversation and the willingness to partner with some or all of those aforementioned agencies, county being one, obviously, in funding that gap. Any feelings on that whatsoever?
What was the fourth one? County of Waseca, the EDA?
Both EDAs.
Both EDAs, all right. County EDA.
I would just express appreciation that that you're taking a look at how to coordinate. There's a lot of money going to housing from a lot of different directions.
Right.
both at the state and the federal level. And heaven knows we need it. But we also need to coordinate that effort so that we do it in the best possible way. And it is clear we need it. Housing studies from both Waseca and Janesville said we need housing, we need housing, we need housing. We need affordable housing, workforce housing, we need senior housing that is accessible for seniors so that they can move out of their big old houses and give that to families and have a home that is comfortable in theirs. So please continue to, at least from my end, continue to explore these possibilities. I sit on the Housing Trust Fund. The pot of money there right now is, this big, and the need is this big. Let's figure out a way to multiply those dollars and coordinate across programs so that we can get a big enough chunk to do something purposeful.
And thank you for that, that's helpful. I shouldn't, just backing up a little bit with the local housing trust fund, I shouldn't say that we're not talking about it in this conversation. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit more complicated in terms of granting dollars through an EDA. So the city's going through somewhat of a process to implement allowances to be able to facilitate a grant. That would be a little easier for us with the existence of the local housing trust fund, using that as the funding vehicle to partner in a housing project. So I guess what I'm suggesting is whatever the funding source is from county EDA, investment through that local housing trust fund may be the best solution or the most plug and play solution that we have without having to implement further programmatic elements of the EDA level.
Let's not reinvent the wheel on this, but let's use the mechanisms that are in place and figure out how to make the short road.
Right, and hopefully we get some more clarification on LHTF to know if those dollars can go further.
So how much would be available through that if you could donate this project?
Through the local housing trust fund? Well, that's what we're waiting to get clarification on. So the original, if you remember even back to last year, when this was implemented in July, the language at that point in time was, as I had stated, it was a dollar for dollar match up to $150,000 and then 50 cents on the dollar for another amount. There was a cap on there eventually, I can't recall what it is, as well as some other funding mechanisms, which is why we implemented that, knowing that in the 11th hour of the legislative session, all of these housing dollars got allocated and appropriated. So we funneled the dollars through that more focused approach for housing with the local housing trust fund. And that's exclusive to Waseca County. We partner with Mid Prairie to facilitate that on our behalf. Again, so as not to reinvent the wheel. Housing specialists that already exist in that organization help facilitate that conversation, but still, Waseca County has the authority over the local housing trust fund. So it is exclusive to the county, I should say. So the hope would be that if we had $150,000, you could get $150,000 match by allowances through that program. In the best case scenario. So why that's helpful for some of these investor groups to know is, again, their dollars can go further if they're willing to invest some of those dollars through the local housing trust fund.
So if they funnel their money through us, then we could possibly get matched.
And I keep trying to think of a better word for funneling because it feels nefarious in my mind, but
Yeah,
that's
that
what it
doesn't
is.
sound right.
So investing our dollars in the local housing trust fund,
Yeah.
but yes, regardless. So anything else on that? Any concern I should ask overall with the continued conversations from the county?
Is there a timeline on this, you know, to get this gap funding? So they could start the project?
Somewhat. So as of now, they would have to request or submit additional application for tax increment financing. The previous, if you remember that, we kind of scrambled back in June to waive our comment period on TIF. Probably that same thing would be asked of us again within the next 30 to 60 days. Will anything happen this year in terms of beginning the project? I don't know. I think they would.
Beginning of the summer, their hopes was to break ground this year.
Yes, and they still perhaps would like to do that, but yes.
The point I wanted to maybe bring out is the Waseca Real Estate Fund only has exclusive development rights until September 20th. So they have a timeline to make a commitment to move forward. So I think it's about, they would like an indication about who's supportive of the project. But they only have till September 20th to make a full, not back out commitment. That's when they're exclusive rights. And I have heard the scuttlebutt is most likely would not be extended again by council.
Anything else on that one? I think we'll talk some more in future meetings about some of those potentially collaborative projects in tandem with the city as we have some more information. I wanted to shift gears a little bit back to some expedited expenses conversation. If you remember from last week, we talked at length about some of the fund balances, where we're sitting in terms of a statement of debt position, a cash flow standpoint, as well as the county as a whole, which is a good place. Those are all good things. But somewhat of some historic investment rates that we have right now, which as of today still haven't changed. The average daily yield is still the same as it has been the last month. So we're not starting to see any of that regression as of yet, but with anticipated Fed changes in September, as we said, we would expect to see that to start ratcheting down over the course of the next months. We're in a position in 2024 to be able to capture some of those unanticipated revenues and offset more burdensome expenditures in future years if we approach that in a creative way or an intuitive way. So I wanted to revisit that as you've had a week to digest some of those things I threw at you to see if there's any aversion or reaction one way or the other, discomfort with approaching some of those potential projects. We mentioned a handful of them in public works, and I'm not suggesting that all of these should be pursued, but we did look at a few of the public works side of things. I would also mention that we did pull the proposed upgrade to the HVAC system in the community services building out of the budget for 2025 early on in this conversation. We know that will be a reality in the next 2 to 3 years, which, but if it fails, we know we're not going to repair it as it is, we're going to replace it as it is. That's another one that is potentially able to avoid a $350,000 bill being factored into a budget a year or two from now. Since I threw a lot of information at you 7 days ago, and you've had a little bit of a chance to digest it.
So what are you saying about we pulled it out early in the budget. Are you saying it could come around since we're under budget and get it out of the way?
Effectively, yeah,
Okay.
effectively. So Brian Tomford had made that presentation
Yeah.
and talked about the benefits of what that systematic change would be. And my takeaway at that time, and it didn't get any disagreement from Brian either, was that at this point in time, it's more of an ask, a desire than the need, because the system still works, it's just not efficient. And it's not heating and cooling spaces as efficiently as it could. So there's some pain points from a staff perspective, certainly, because one day it may be really warm, one day it may be really cold, and there's not really in between. It happens, I get that, but at this point, there's nothing mechanically wrong. We just know that if it fails, we aren't going to be able to replace, or I should say repair as it exists. We would go about replacing the units on the roof.
How would that affect our budget coming up? Is it just kind of seamless, or?
So effectively, I mean, the goal of the conversation, or the whole point of this, is we will have additional room for expenditures in 2024. So that can look two different ways. One, we can call the actual company and say, is there a way you can actually get this done in 2024? We realize the expenditure in 2024. And then materially, it makes no difference in terms of our existing year's budget, because we have the ability to take on that additional expense. If they say, no, we can't get to this until summer of 2025, then as we go through the process of our end of year activity, we try to set aside those funds for that purchase in 2025, but in a way that it is not impacting the levy. We're not trying to raise those funds again, essentially, since they've already been raised. So I'm trying to capture additional revenues this year and use them to offset anticipated expenses in future years, so that we don't have to have a levy conversation about it.
So we can just kind of put like a side account for it, but stick it off. Do you need direction on that, or?
Well, feelings one way or the other.
I think, well, I mean, obviously it's gonna have to get done, because if it goes kaput, then we're in trouble, so. We might just as well have, I would think, my opinion is to get Brian working on that. See if we can get it accomplished yet this year, if not, put the side account and get it done next year.
Do you have other ones?
Besides highway.
Besides the highway one?
As long as a wish list.
Yeah.
No, not huge ones, no, not at all. Like one, by that I mean, for example, I asked Brian to go back to, forgetting the name of the vendor, it's out of Janesville. We need the stairs going downstairs in the lower level of the courthouse replaced. They say, again, they're squishy, not great structurally. That was something that we originally got a quote for in March, I think, in anticipation of adding that to 2025. We didn't add it to 2025, but that one's going to be more in the realm of $40,000. It's extravagant, but it's necessary. And
Gertz Construction.
that might be it. Maybe it was actually, I'll try to find it in the in-between. But they were willing to still honor that quote for March, so I asked if they could put that in their project schedule, and I think they can still put that in their project schedule for November of this year. So,
What's the maximum number you would pick out for the wish list for December 31 of 2024?
Tammy, close yours. I guess I don't really want to put a maximum number on it necessarily. The comfortable level would be in approaching $1 million.
You feel that we could have that many things brought into 24?
Say that again, sorry.
That $1 million you think will be under budget by that? Is that what you're saying?
Not just under budget, but over revenued, if that makes more sense. It's not that we aren't spending
Gotcha.
the dollars we anticipated, we're just making more than we budgeted
Yes.
for.
Okay.
So it could be absorbed without realizing it, no levy.
What are those other projects that you
The other one that will be showing up in the next 2 to 3 years is, as we talked about a little bit last week, is the roof replacement at the highway building. That one will definitely be in the next 2 years of budgetary cycle and anticipated more in the $200,000 to $250,000 range. We have to replace the flat roofs there. So that one definitely needs to happen. The other ones are, of the other 5 things from a public works standpoint, 2 or more needs, we're gonna program these in 3 or once, which is, we did talk about that excavator some this week. We can't, did I say the right one this time?
Backhoe.
Thank you. Backhoe. It felt wrong, I knew it was wrong. And replacing the one that we have, trading that in, and in this current year, so we will move forward with that. And now that I think about it, I don't know if I actually told Jim that, so he'll be happy. Follow up with the conversation. I'll have to tell him. I don't have a robust list, which is a good thing. Where I guess I'm going further is anticipating larger scale construction projects in the next couple of years. And I'm thinking of it more in, like I provided in that budget forecast for you. What does this look like over a 20-year picture? And how does what we can save now or designate now help that conversation? Because I'm just looking at levy sustainability as the goal and removing as many of these conversations as we can to be point in time. Oh, what do we do about this? We got to come up with $400,000. So as much foresight as we can put into the process avoids that roller coaster scenario in future years. And if you come back and say, as we kind of heard that, well, we want to target a 0% levy, that's great. That's awesome. I have no anxiety about it. But then what can we do to make sure that's a sustainable thing where 0 doesn't become 6 next year? And that's really the impetus of this conversation. And the county is in a great position to be able to do that. And I would even argue should be having those conversations, fiscally speaking. But we still have to look, like, what's this going to look like? What are we going to need 20 years from now and work backwards?
Generally speaking, this $1 million, we could probably offset a lot of stuff in the next couple of years.
Yes, yeah, we really got aggressive in 2021 with some unanticipated federal dollars on the IT side of things. Our IT was in a pretty rough spot in 2020. And we are in a really good place now, and now on a predictable 5-year replacement schedule. So we know what those are going to be. It's anticipated. There are not going to be a lot of surprises. Could there be? Yes, of course, in like a disaster scenario. But other than that, we're on a replacement schedule for our major infrastructure items. So that isn't a stressor anymore. But we had to get over that hurdle and bite off $500,000 at a time to be able to get there. But
Thank you.
anything else in the last few seconds?
You guys want to see that list in written form?
A spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be
Sure.
great to have a list, just.
You do that next week.
Get it out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
I would just say, from my point of view, obviously, we don't want to spend money that we don't need to spend, because that's the kind of people we are. But at the same time, we want things to be nice. We want them to stay nice. And we know we spend less money if we anticipate these things and take care of them before they get to be so that we don't have a choice. So things like roofs and HVAC and those kind of things, I don't have a hard time saying, oh, well, it hasn't totally gone back yet. You know, I had a mother that saved bread bags, so that is a thing you fight to say, use it until it's absolutely done, but I know that that can be counterproductive. So let's have that in mind. In my boots, absolutely. Wonder Bread,
Wonder Bread.
absolutely.
Well,
Yes.
I'd much rather be proactive on this than reactive,
For sure.
you know, especially with our last few minutes of conversation here. I think that's a positive.
If this was all okayed on the spreadsheet and you found out that there was something that couldn't be done by the end of '24, is that just going to be the end of '25, or is that going to be revisited?
Yeah, I talked to Tammy and Carol, what makes the most sense in terms of realizing those expenditures in the current year to be able to cross that year boundary. Yeah, I can leave it there, Mr. Chair, for today.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? It is 9:34. We'll start the Board of Commissioners meeting for Waseca County. Please stand and say pledge of allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning again and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. Is anyone here for public comment? Anyone for public comment? Please come to the podium and state your name. Yes. Thank you.
My name is Ann Fitch. I'm the Executive Director of Waseca Area Chamber of Commerce. Do you have my address? Sure. 105 7th Avenue Northeast, Waseca, Minnesota. I wanted to thank the commissioners for funding the Waseca County Intern Program. We had the recognition program yesterday. Commissioner Krause was there, and so we heard a little bit about that. Just thank you so much for funding that. The mentorship of young adults in our community is so incredibly important. We were lucky enough to be a host site at the chamber, and the young lady that came to us was a painfully shy young lady who her mode of communication was shoulder shrugs and smiles. And now we're working with full sentences and conversations, and she can answer the chamber phone with all the wacky questions that we get without being prompted. So the growth that you are facilitating in young people in our community, in our county, is so needed and wonderful. So I just want to thank the commissioners for funding that program, and I hope that funding continues and grows because that program is needed and wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, and I did pass out a copy to.
Oh, perfect.
Is anyone else here for public comment? Anyone for public comment? All right, we will move into approval of the agenda. Rachel, do you have anything to add or do we? Commissioner Krause?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Milbrandt?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Christopherson?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner
No chair?
Welker? Thank you. Michael? Beth?
No.
All right, with that being said, I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Milbrandt, second by Commissioner Mulder. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Next is the legislative updates and the reception with our delegates, actually our distinguished. First on the list is Representative Peggy Bennett, District 23A. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, good to see you all. How much time did you want us to take? Hour or two? No, not speak briefly. We have a wealth of information back there, and I'm not going to try to repeat things. And I actually brought some notes. You know, I think I'm going to speak more on the areas that I sit on committees. There's a lot of things that affect counties. I am going to talk about one thing that came up in Albert Lea with the commissioners there that they talked about, but I sit on both education committees, K-12. And education, of course, affects everything from the city to the county to the state to businesses and just life in general. So I think I'll comment on those, but I do want to bring up something about the county jail that I became aware of. And I should say I'm Peggy Bennett. I represent District 23A. I live in Albert Lea, and it's a pleasure to serve Waseca County, mostly the southern half in 23A. I've gotten to know a lot of people in Richland and some of the other communities. And I was mentioning that I actually buy my meat now at the Richland Meat Market at Neighbors Meats. They have good meat if anybody's looking for some excellent meat. So let me just talk about one thing that came up and it has to do with the county jail. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, that when somebody comes in to be incarcerated in the county, if they're on Medicaid, that gets dropped in the county. Yeah, I'm seeing shaking heads, yes. So I did hear from County Commissioner in Albert Lea with concerns about that, so I looked into it. First of all, it's a federal law that regulates that, so there's nothing we can do at the state level except advocate. There is a law that's federally that says they must go off of Medicaid, and the county then takes care of that. If they have private insurance, they can continue, of course, on their private insurance. There are some things going on, working in the direction of what we should see, because to me, I heard that and I thought, well, why in the world would they take them off Medicaid, and the counties pay for that, that's not right. So federally, they are starting a pilot program, very small. Our state has opted into that, but it only affects a few counties and it's very limited on things. There was a law passed for those counties for maybe 90 days before they're set to be released. You're familiar with that. Then that coverage can take place for specific things, especially mental health, things like that. But I do believe that's something we need to work on, especially federally, so that we can make changes at the state level, because it makes no sense to me that that burden would be put on the counties. So just mention that. And then I was going to talk about, some of the election things that passed, and we've got the EMS, energy, housing, but we've got so many good people back there that sit on those committees too. I think I'll just touch on education quickly. That's a passion of mine. I'm a retired teacher, as commissioner is at Multimer.
Thank you.
Also, and others in this room, I'm sure. I taught elementary school in Albert Lea for 33 years. Actually, I taught for 1 year in Wells. That was fun. And I love it. Taught mostly first grade. That's a passion of mine. It's really the reason I'm here. I'm representing all my kids. I have over 750 kids, and everybody else in Minnesota, because education, as we said, touches everyone. So I was rather disappointed in the last 2 years, even though the legislature put a ton of money into our schools, much of it was mandated dollars. And so we're seeing our schools struggling right now, because even though they got unprecedented funding, they also got 67 new mandates to go with it. I won't get into the specifics because of time. My opinion is we should focus on the core academics, reading, math, science, that kind of thing, because half of our kids in Minnesota can't read at grade level. It's just under half. Scores have been going down, and not just from the pandemic, but before that, and we need to focus on it. There was one ray of light, the READ Act, which I supported, although I would have changed and put actually more funding into that READ Act, which will focus our schools and give them some resources to change over some of their curriculum. We've had some real faulty reading curriculum for probably a generation. I was actually teaching when it came in, and I remember really questioning it. Those of you here probably grew up with phonics, because that's an important part of reading, and there was a time period where that really got pushed out. And there's a component called the science of reading, and that just got lost. And so our kids were lost in reading, and they're really struggling. And when kids struggle in reading, that affects every other subject area, from math, because math scores are also way down. They're worse than reading scores and proficiency, and science is worse yet. And of course, if you can't read, then you can't do any of those things. You also, if you can't read, struggle, and you probably don't like school. I remember with my first graders, the ones that couldn't read or struggled with those academics didn't like school. So I don't need to preach to you on this, but it's so important, and I'm going to continue to advocate. I like local control, so I would do it without mandates, but with incentives, and provide that funding, training, and so on. We have some through the READ Act, so again, that was a good start. We need more. The SRO officer issue, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which was in the news. In 2023, there was legislation that basically made it so they could not serve in schools, and for officers to do so in a reasonable way, and in a way that protected them too. And whether on purpose or by accident, I'm not going to get into that, but it needed to be changed. And there was a lot of pressure, and I thank those of you who helped advocate for that, but there was a change in the law, which now school resource officers are by and large, for the schools that want them, they're back there. So that's another really good positive thing. So I'm going to stop there, because you have a lot of people behind me that have much expertise, and I'm going to let them share some of the other things that I know counties are interested in. Did you want questions or just presentation?
Any questions? Yeah.
I just thank you for supporting Richland Meat Market.
Oh. It's really good, you know, and tell you what, get their
That's my
steaks.
district, so I
Is that your district?
business we get in town. It's awesome.
Excellent. Well, and I know there's some flooding issues. I've
Yes.
been in contact with actually mostly just constituents. And I know the city is working on that, and I am here, if anybody's here, I'm here as a resource to help with that, if there's a future bonding and so on.
Yeah, and I was gonna bring that up to the other, but I'll bring it up now that we are real close to the end of that water study.
Sure, that's what I
And
heard.
we will be coming to you guys with the direction we'd like to see it go.
Excellent. Yeah, we need to get that fixed, so.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, and hopefully you can go enjoy a good T-bone from Neighbors Meeting. Give them a little plug. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bennett. Next is Representative Petersburg with District 19B.
Thank you so much for having me here and asking for updates. This will be very likely the last time that I address you as a state representative, unless you call me back before the end of the year, as I'm, of course, retiring and not running for re-election. This last legislative session was quite, especially if you include the entire biennium, was quite disappointing in a lot of different ways. I do most of my work in the Transportation Committee, and even though that tends to be more bipartisan and not controversial, it probably represented some of the largest growth in government spending and cost to the constituency of any other year and certainly any other area. When you start talking about a 0.75% sales tax increase in the metropolitan area counties just for transit primarily, that's a huge increase. And then you add in the gasoline tax that is now going to be indexed to inflation on top of large increases in tab fees for cars and trucks, et cetera. It really grew about 30%, the budget, which is pretty large for this year, especially when we started the biennium with about a $17 billion surplus. But that is what it is. You know, there are a lot of things that I was able to do. One of the things in transportation that Senator Jasinski and I got to work on, which was kind of fun, was we have now legislation that will allow flying cars to be licensed in the state of Minnesota if they ever come to Minnesota. Yeah, it's not quite the Jetson car that you can't push it and it goes into a briefcase, but it is something that is going to happen sooner rather than later. It's not going to be for everybody, but those that can use it, it's kind of interesting to have the ability to get in your garage, drive out to the airport, open up the wings and fly 300 miles or so to someplace, do whatever you want to do there, visit grandkids, whatever, and then fly back home and drive back into your garage with the same vehicle. It uses regular gas, so it's something that was kind of fun to do. Outside of that, my biggest concern over the legislation as a whole really represents the idea that rather than fixing problems, we're going to just throw more money at them. And I don't think that is going to be successful long term. If you continue to just fill in the gaps of the funding shortages without trying to figure out what the root cause is of whatever issue it is, whether it's homelessness or low income or healthcare, and all you do is keep adding more money to it, you have to understand that eventually that balloon keeps getting bigger and bigger until it finally can't handle it anymore. And we're not really doing that. Instead, we're looking at, well, and I understand as a legislator, we don't want to say no, and it's easier to say yes, and so we just throw in more money at various programs and move them forward. But you can't continue to do that. Education is one of those areas where we need to work on, but we need to let education and those that are elected locally actually have some control over what's going on in their schools without everything being top-down driven. And so we could talk about the large dollars of, that were invested in education over the last 2 years coming back to the school districts. But when those dollars come with up to 60, we think there's 65 new mandates, then they really haven't given them any new money to work with. You haven't really allowed them to do what's necessary. And after all, the Constitution allowed the board of directors of the school board to be elected by local people, because they should have the best idea on how to educate the kids around them. But we're not doing that. Again, it's easier for those in the state legislature to stay in control by just mandating everything. And when the administrative portion of our government is also under the same guidance, then you see we're looking at lots of different problems. One of the really sad things that did not get done this year, and it has to do with a lot of different things, but we weren't able to get the funding for Waseca's water tower and infrastructure. It was in the bonding bill, but because of issues up in the Senate and even in the House, the leadership did not decide bonding was going to be a priority this year. They said it was, but it wasn't. They said many different things. They said Social Security tax should be eliminated, but it wasn't. They had a lot of different things that didn't happen. And I think we had the money to be able to do it, but the priorities are different. And that is the way it is with whenever there's a change in leadership and a change in majority, those core values tend to change. And so we're at where we're at. That's, I'll answer a lot of questions afterwards or now as to what's going on. But those are some of the high points that I think were of concern this year. The other side that I think we haven't really addressed is the lack of support for law enforcement. Right now, last I heard, the state of Minnesota, if you include cities, police department, sheriffs, and so forth, we're well over 1,000 men short, just being able to fill back what is available. And we can't get people to come out and participate, to take on those jobs. And I would argue, why would anybody want to come into a business or into a profession in which if you do your job, you can still go to jail? And it's one of those things where we need to show, again, a respect for our professional people, both law enforcement and other areas of professions as well, and give them the respect and responsibility they do. And instead of making it easier for us to get law enforcement and have them do the things that they need to do, we're making it harder and harder with more restrictions and regulations. Earlier, I had talked with somebody about price controls. St. Paul and Minneapolis were toying with rent controls, thinking that by controlling rents, all of a sudden you're going to make housing cheaper. Well, I suppose temporarily you do, but the downside is that you lose housing because those that can't afford the price controls are going to just sell their property to individuals, and then you lose that property. And so it just accentuates the problem. You can't regulate the cost that people are paying for things, and then also regulate the pricing in which they have. It just doesn't work. You kind of lose from one to the other. So you can't do both. All of the issues this year tend to be running around the employee and about what they need. And so when you control those costs of individuals in which the individual is becoming less and less productive for the same wage, you have to understand that the business has to make that up someplace. And we need to understand that business can only stay around as long as they're making some profit. If it costs them money, they have no money to go, once it's gone. And if we don't understand that process, we're going to be in a sad state. I know I've taken up more time. I could go on and on, but I thank you for your support over these last 12 years. I appreciate most of you have been there as long as I have. Thank you for your service to the county as well, and thank you. Do you want me to introduce Tom Sexton, or are you going to do that?
Yeah, just one comment that I have that comes to mind over many, but is the centerline motorcycle law that's going to go into effect for riding and stop and go traffic. And I just always think about, when you're in stop and go traffic, and I've seen it more than once, where somebody will actually open their door and pour out their cold coffee. So we're gonna probably find some extra wait time on ambulance service getting to the scene of it.
Yeah, I argued against that one. I had a person sat right in front of me, another Republican who really likes it. It's called split lane driving, in which there's argument that says during traffic stops like that, a motorcycle sitting behind a car gets hit more times than people would like because people don't see them and don't stop soon enough. And so having the ability to go vehicles, they say it's safer. A couple of things in regards to that. Traffic has to be traveling less than 40 or 45 miles an hour, I believe, and the responsibility and liability for somebody driving between vehicles is up to the motorcycle. So if somebody opens up the car or whatever, it's going to be on the motorcycle. So they have to be aware that they're taking on that responsibility. I voted against it, but it got passed anyway into the bill. But it's something that I don't see as a really good issue. I'm not a motorcycle rider, and so I don't know whether or not it's actually safer or not. Those that do say that it is.
Right.
I guess we'll just have to see.
It could be argued all day long because they're supposed to be going 25 miles an hour or less. But I mean, what are you going to say is stop and go traffic? Now you're just going to have, I need to get ahead of this line of vehicles.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I argued against it. I think it was a bad idea.
Anyone else?
Thank you for your service.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We were just together not too long ago. We can count it in hours. But when we departed last night, my wife was coming home here in Waseca from a Legion meeting, and she was rear-ended. And so she's doing okay. I just wanted to share that. But I wanted to take the opportunity because of that to really thank City of Waseca Police and Fire. I feel pass that on here, Zimmerman. Jay Doulis was there with Fire and everybody else. So we have a great community here. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity of serving our community and taking our challenge to St. Paul and really moving forward. But with that, this police issue that John talked about is very concerning. My background is 26.5 years in the Air Force. I'm used to bringing people in, mentoring them into a higher position so they can take over from me. And both my sons followed me into that career field. Well, we're seeing with everything that's going on with law enforcement, you're very familiar with this. Police and peace officers are not encouraging their kids to come into this career field. We're 1,000 officers short, but even more concerning, we're 2,400 officers in a window within the next 2 years of being retirement eligible. Okay, so we're going to probably in the next session, from what I'm seeing and what I'm getting indicated, is trying to encourage those officers to work on a couple years, up to 5 years. But that still has not fixed the problem of encouraging people to come into the career field. And we are going to have to be more competitive in our pay and our encouragement to bring people into the smaller towns, because Minneapolis, $25,000 sign-on bonus, higher pay that was just approved by the same people who said defund the police. So I encourage you to work on increasing your knowledge of this problem and see what we can do together to see if we can improve this problem. Because it's crisis, and we're going to see more and more. Obviously, the budget, John alluded to that, I'm sure all the other legislatures will as well, is a concern. We've now reset the baseline budget above $70 billion. We got there with a surplus, but we can't guarantee that surplus every year. So how are we going to deal with that? Is it going to be raising taxes? Certainly, when people are moving out of state because they can't be competitive, we're lowering the population, those future taxpayers as well. So we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And I know we have a lot of infrastructure issues here in this area. That's one of the reasons I took on running for office, being on both planning commissions, the city and the county, because I can see those. We need to encourage people to be able to move into Waseca and Waseca County. And we need to provide some infrastructure because developers are just not going to take the risk. That's what we've seen. That's just a fact. So we need to help them out to encourage them to build houses. I've talked to a developer who's over in Janesville right now. He's having trouble selling the houses that he built. So when do they just stop taking the risk? So that's some of the concerns I think we all share. Certainly if you have others, I want to hear them and take them forward and see what I can do about those. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Any questions?
For time.
All right. I apologize if I have to leave early. I have a 11 o'clock Zoom meeting I have to be at. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we'd also invited Edgar Fernandez as well. He had a really tough work conflict that he wasn't sure if he'd be able to navigate around, but sends his greetings regardless. And I said we could probably get him into a future board meeting to introduce himself to the board as the other challenger at 19B as well. And then Representative Daniels, again, as well, sends greetings, recovering from a recent surgery, so I wasn't able to make that trip over here, but I wanted to send his greetings and thank you for the invitation as well.
Thanks, Michael. Next is Senator Carney.
Good morning.
Morning. Good to see familiar faces. I've seen all of you, I believe. I know either in my office or up at the county get-together up there in St. Paul. So thank you for serving. Appreciate you guys. And always good to have personal conversations. So thank you. So I grew up on a farm, and I'm a construction guy, so a lot of common sense and just working together in the trades. You have different things. So I've only been in 4 years, and so I thought, there's going to be some of that. So going into the session 2023, we were in the minority, 33-34, so really close. So thinking that there would be a lot of working together, being that close. And quite honestly, depending on who the chairman of the committees you serve on kind of makes that difference. So I serve on agriculture, which is very bipartisan. Appreciate that. There's good things that happen there. The meat cutting program that we have, we have a shortage of meat cutting with the pandemic that was really revealed. So that was some funding there that got to be put in. So that was the bill that I carried, and it was supposed to be more. Senator Putnam was a big supporter of that, and then I went to the House and they cut it down. Some, but still got funded to, I think it's 350,000-ish. So again, ag is the one that's enjoyable to work with. There is still bipartisan there. And then I serve on elections, which there was quite a few election laws changed, and it put some more issues on you guys with staying open longer and some other things that they did. And Governor Pawlenty, Governor Dayton, and Governor Ventura they all said that we will not pass election bills that are not bipartisan support. And Governor Walz actually committed to that, but then as we got in, that promise wasn't fulfilled. So the election bill was not supported by almost any bill. There's a couple little fixes that we got in there. Other than that, there was no bipartisan support in that election bill. They just passed it. So that was very difficult committee to serve in, very partisan, but we still do the best we can. Make our points and our appeals. So the other one I serve in is labor and industry. And I was actually a union carpenter for 22 years and now self-employed or general contractor, kind of have the perspective of both sides. And the chair of that committee is difficult to work with. It's labor and industry, and she focused more on the labor. And I always would say you have to have both labor and industry. We need each other. If there's no business, labor is not needed. And business is the most important thing that business has is their employees. And just with a lot of the mandates and things that the state did, trying to get some of the numbers down to make small businesses exempt. We tried, because they made it the one size fits all. The big businesses are not the same as the small businesses. So really frustrating that we couldn't get some exemptions for small businesses with 10, we started like 20 employees or less, or 10, 5. You know, it's, the only exemption I got this year, I tried to get it for farmers. I had the bill. We had 2 amendments that actually we made it. 2 years, no bills in the labor and industry from the Republican side. 2 amendments. I had a couple of the more moderate, should be more moderate senators, Democrats that voted with us to get, we had the sugar beets farmers up in northern Minnesota where they have a big influx of people to come to work for just a short time. So trying to get exemption for 30 days or 45 days, we did get a 30-day exemption for them. And then we're trying to do with small farmers, trying to just get in there with the agriculture, 5 employees or less. That's all we could get. So we got that passed in the committee, but then it was pulled out in the Commerce Committee. So some of the high points, I guess, was the money for $30 million aid package for the EMS, and what we've heard that is they're so important to their small communities and being able to fund them, and so that got funded. The only bill that was in the education committee that made it was actually Representative Bennett. She didn't talk about that, the pipeline bill to get special needs teachers, more of those. That was the only bill that was a Republican bill in the Senate. So, and then the restoring your religious freedom, that was a big deal that we got towards the end. And I guess the only other thing I'm going to talk about is just the bonding bill. You know, the first year, so it's a 2-year biennium. We set the budget and all the money of spending. And then in the second year, it's bonding is number 1. So what happened this year is with the legislation going so fast, there's so many bills, there's never been so many bills dropped in a biennium, I think, in the history of the state. They were doing so many things that they lost the focus of what this year was supposed to be about, which was infrastructure, wastewater treatment plant. And the need for those and other infrastructure needs, we didn't make it, and because we're working on their fixes, and then with the trifecta, I think they got a little overzealous and greedy. They wanted more, and so they lost the real focus on what the infrastructure and the bonding was so important. And then in the last bit of the session, which probably many of you know, we actually had a delay from the Democrats for, I can't remember, it was 14 hours. We waited for them because they had some infighting there. And so then at the last, they passed this huge omnibus bill that had never been done before. And so now there's actually a lawsuit that's been filed that the bill is unconstitutional. So I guess I'll stop with that. But thank you. It's always a pleasure to see when you guys come to visit, or when you just give me a call or we can meet. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Senator Brown? Thank you. Senator Jasinski. Good morning.
Well, thank you everyone for having it. Going last is, I guess, the easiest because a lot of great things have been said, or some not so great, but I'm in my 8th year in the Minnesota Senate, so proud to serve the Waseca area. This last redistricting, I go a little farther to the west now and pick up Janesville, where I used to be just Waseca. So the biggest thing I think I go through is just such a tough session. I mean, our first 6 years, there was a lot of compromise, and we got a lot of things done. John Petersburg and myself on the transportation side got lots of great things passed in our first couple of years, or my first couple of years. Which one was including the auto part sales tax. So we started capturing the existing auto part sales tax and put that towards transportation, eliminated a portion of the tax on Social Security, reducing taxes on certain tax levels. So we got some good things done. But these last 2 years have been very difficult. As others have said, they had an $18 billion surplus. They spent that, and they increased spending by another $10 billion. So they increased State spending by 40%, and you as commissioners, can you imagine having a 40% levy increase in 1 year? I mean, it's unexplainable, it's not sustainable to grow government that much in 1 year. So that was very frustrating to see happen. Lots of bad policy. The spending is just crazy of what the increase was. I think it was the largest increase in our state's history in spending. And a lot of things were spent on not good things. Talking about the bonding bill, and I know we had that in there in the Senate side for Waseca and the wastewater, or the water infrastructure and the water tower. And the previous year, they did that 40% increase, and they did a $2 billion in bonding, and about $1 billion of that was for nonprofits. And that money went to things that are not infrastructure, and that's what a capital investment bill should be. Bonding should be for capital infrastructure, wastewater, clean water, roads, bridges, keeper money for colleges and universities we already have. But unfortunately, with the one-party control, they passed a cash bonding bill and spent about $1 billion, or just short of $1 billion, on nonprofits. And that had never been done in the state's history. When I first came on the bonding committee, we had about $3 billion in requests each year, and we funded about $1 billion. So about 1 in 3 projects were funded. After they started funding nonprofits, you know what the request went up to? $7 billion is what the request was this last year. That was what requested across the state. And they got their priorities up because, again, after spending all that money, we should have focused on the bonding bill. That was what we do. You know, we approved the budget in the other year and came into an even year, we're supposed to do a bonding bill. But I believe the other side wanted to pass a very progressive left agenda, and they knew that this may be the last chance to do that. So they took that opportunity. The Speaker of the House was quoted on the news saying, "I did what I had to do to get our agenda passed," or "we did what we had to do to get our agenda passed." That's not the way Minnesota should work. We should work together. Senator Dornick talked about the election bill. It's always been a bipartisan bill. This went through in one-party control, very controversial, and it went through. And that was typical of pretty much the whole agenda this year. Was very one-sided. Transportation was one kind of the high spot that we did that was not so partisan. We actually passed that in the Senate 66-0. So it was a decent bill. There were some things in there that I didn't like, but overall, as I always have to compromise, I think if you look at the overall transportation bill, it was worth passing. The lane splitting bill was one that I was totally against in the beginning. After listening to a lot of testimony, it did start to make some sense, so I did vote for that. Again, that's kind of a compromise that I think you have to do. So that did get passed, and it did pass on 66-0. The law enforcement thing that the other people have brought up, or my other legislators have said, is that's a huge issue. They're down, I think it's 360 or 370 just in Minneapolis alone. They're down. You talk to the Colonel, used to be Colonel Langer, now it's Colonel Bogovich. She talks about, you know, the class sizes are down, they can't recruit. And of course, if you have a city council or people that aren't supporting the law enforcement, and every day when you go to work, you're concerned you may be prosecuted, I would be concerned. It's a huge issue, and we need to do something about that. And I don't think it's going to happen until the majority changes, or at least there's a compromise with even having one body. We have to have some compromise. One of the big thing in law enforcement, you know, right now there's 2/3 served and 1/3 is on parole. They changed that to 50-50. So now 50% of the time is in jail and 50% is on parole. And then I think they maxed that at 5 years. So this is very frustrating. So to see that happening is frustrating. We in the Senate actually passed a bill and actually got some Democrat votes on it. I think we got 7 to make some of those serious crimes not applicable to the 50-50 rule. They voted for it with some manslaughter and second-degree murder and some other things to say that those couldn't be 50% 50 or 50-50 time served. They got about 7 members voted for it. Then it went to conference committee and then all got stripped out. So the senators got to have their good vote for their districts and show that they were pro-law enforcement. And then in the end, it got stripped out of conference committee and none of that went through. So very frustrating. Again, I've been in for 8 years and it was the worst 2 years I've ever seen. I think it's getting worse. So something's got to happen. Fortunately, we have a possibility of taking the majority back. We have a special election in District 45. Senator Kelly Morrison ran for Congress, so she stopped her spot or resigned from her position. So right now, we're 33-33. That's why the governor will not call us into a special session, because he knows we're tied 33-33, and I will not get anything done that he wants. So that's happening. Other than that, so I serve on the transportation, as you all know, I've been involved. John talked about some of the terrible fees that we have, the affordability. And now you're seeing insurance costs go up, your license tax costs are going up, your sales tax are going up. It's just becoming unaffordable. And when the government is spending 40% increases, you're not seeing that in the private sector by anybody seeing that much of an increase. So it's frustrating to see what's happening. It's not sustainable. I think something drastic is going to happen in the upcoming couple of years if we don't do something and change the direction of where we're going. I also serve on bonding, as we talked about the bonding projects here in Waseca. I would have loved to got those. That was my top priority this last year, to try and get those in. But again, that has to originate in the House of Representatives. They could not come to agreement to pass that bill, so we never even got a bill to vote on. We had one of our own that we wanted to do, but of course, the procedure is it has to originate in the House, so we could not pass that bill. I also sit on state government and local government and veterans, and that was a frustrating committee as we talked about some of the changes they've done there. And then also I'm the deputy minority leader, so I'm in charge of basically everything from recruiting to running the floor to running our caucus. So we have 33 members, and I'll tell you, even in 33 members, we have some disagreements. So we have to come together and try and work that. That's kind of one of my big jobs with the minority leaders, to try and bring our group together and try and come to a consensus of how we want to vote and what our issues are. So that was interesting as well. But other than that, I think that kind of summarizes what's going on. We want to continue to work this year, and then again, if we would take that majority in the Minnetonka area, it would be 34-33 the other way. And I think that's really what people are asking for. They want some checks and balances. We're hearing that a lot of polling. It's pretty overwhelming that people see what happened this last year and said there should be some checks and balances. So the House has to take 4 spots, or we have to take 1 spot. And there is a possibility that both happening. So then you have a Republican House, Republican Senate, and a Democrat governor, and that would at least put some checks and balances that we've seen before. Sometimes people say, well, you don't get things done, but I think, you want some checks and balances to make sure that things are level across the state. It's pretty much a 49-51 across the state if you look at Democrat versus Republican and across the state. So when you have a one-party control and they pass that completely down to one side, you're leaving 49% of the state voiceless. And the state flag, we can talk about all kinds of different issues that have changed that are frustrating, that are really dividing us. So if you talk to people, I think they're more frustrated that things have gone that way. So we just want to get some checks and balances back. So with that, I think my previous legislators have talked most of other things. So if you have questions for us or myself, we would love to do it. And again, it's really great to serve Waseca and Waseca County here. Any questions?
Anything for Senator Jasinski?
I've got a question for the group now.
Okay, I'll go back then.
Thank you. One of our frustrations here because of Waseca County and heavily farming and drainage, we're seeing a lot of pressure up at the state, passing more and more legislation on trying to control our drainage in our fields. And I don't see a lot of things that's coming through that are making anything illegal, but it's just making more bureaucratic, more steps we have to go through in order to get our farm drained or a main put in or whatever. This past year now, most of that didn't go through, but the one that did was the public waters, reclassifying our public waters and giving all the control to the DNR in that say. So we're worried about what's going to become of that, because once it's labeled a public water, it gets more and more difficult to get any drainage done or anything done without more and more dollars, more and more permits. And I guess that's my concern. I would like to see if any of you guys, I don't know how often you guys change committees, if we could get more representation on those committees or more, if there's ways of dealing with some of the opposition to our drainage in the off season, where you get together and talk about some of these things and where we can compromise or what they're actually after in some of this legislation that they're trying to push through. You guys have any comments on that?
So basically what you've just shared is the change in philosophy of the state legislature, primarily due to population distribution in the state. Right now, there are very few DFL members of the legislature that actually would be classified anything other than metro area. And so they're going to also be in charge of all the committees. And back when Wagenius was in the House and a few others from metropolitan area, they were the ones that believed they had all the insight into what was best in greater Minnesota, even though they'd never lived here or understood it. It's one of the other things in which the general philosophy, it seems like, in the current leadership, is that everything needs to be centralized and under central control, which does not do well for regional differences across the state and understanding what's going on. If you understand that it seems more and more likely that the agencies that are controlled by the administration are controlling the committees in itself, especially in regards to environmental issues. It makes sense that they're going to want to be centrally controlled so that they have more control over what's going on in greater Minnesota. However, that doesn't do well for the local people that are electing representation for them to make those decisions, as well as for the individuals that are actually living in those communities, knowing what is best for their communities. And so, to me, the situation is certainly somewhat committee related, but it also is an understanding of where the makeup is of the committees and where they're coming from, and understanding that that's what's happening. We need to turn that around and have more people that are involved with areas such as education and environment and farmers and others, actually have more input into the legislature. That means that counties and others need to have a bigger presence as a legislative bloc, talking to those committees. They need to go up there in force and say, you guys know what you're doing. This is what's going on. They may or may not listen, but if you don't do it, you're just kind of abiding by it.
It's hard to follow that because John's been up there obviously, but working in government, the more you have regulations, the more you have justification to hire more people. If that's what the DNR is doing, they're definitely getting bigger with more regulations. It's not going to help us. So again, like what John said, we need to unify and get our voice up there. Maybe that's your lobbyists, some education fees for people we know don't have the right background, but are still sitting on these committees. And certainly I'll take that message up there as well.
Make a quick comment. And I did serve on the Agriculture Committee my first 2 terms, and I loved it. Unfortunately, it was brought from 2 committees to 1, and we tried to keep our farmers on that committee, so I stepped off of that. But I wanted to speak on a bigger picture, because I heard you say, let's get more people on the committees. We have a problem in the legislature right now, and it's called omnibus bills, and you've heard that before. These big bills, you heard about the big junk bill that Senator Jasinski and so on talked about, but even just the regular omnibus bills, and both sides use them, so this is something that needs to be reformed and fixed. Because in committee, typically, we'll hear a bill will come forward, we will hear, you might come up and talk about it, we'll hear from different constituents and the agencies, and then what we should do as a committee is vote on those bills. Are we going to send it forward or not? But what happens now is oftentimes as committee members, we don't get to vote on those omnibus bills and that bill in committee, because it is basically set aside to potentially go into an omnibus bill. And that doesn't require any kind of vote. So you become voiceless, and so do we as legislators. That's got to get fixed. I have had a bill, and Senator Dornick has co-authored it, to try to fix that. I'm not sure if my bill is the right way to go, but we need to fix it. And it may just be, we need a governor and leadership in the House and the Senate that says, we're not going to operate like this anymore. And that's the chance you take, because it can get voted down, but that's how it should be. because we get all this junk legislation, things that would never pass out of committee, and perhaps this would be one of them, we don't even get to vote on it. So I just wanted to bring that up because there is a larger picture on why all this bad legislation gets through.
Sure, thank you.
I think you hit a hot spot. I think everybody wants to talk about it. The frustrating thing that I've seen in this last couple of years is just the true growth in government the other side wants to do. Between paid family leave and the Office of Cannabis Management, I think there was 330 employees, new employees hired to oversee the paid family leave and the earned sick and safe time. The Republicans had a choice of a different approach of giving tax incentives to provide that. And a lot of companies do, and they did a one size fits all. But if you talk to HR people and ask around these small companies, they're going crazy with all the regulations, learning, going on webinars, trying to figure out if they comply or they don't comply, what they have to do, what they don't have to do. That's going crazy. The Office of Cannabis Management has been just a total disaster. They're trying to oversee so many things, and they're just there. We also have started a new greenhouse gas emissions commission. So what that is, it has to go to board on like a Highway 14 project that we got done a couple of years ago for $130 million project, or ended up being 110. It would have to go through a process to meet standards to make sure there's no new vehicle miles traveled. They don't take safety into concern. It's all about the emissions. And that project, luckily we got it done, because after this you will not see a project like that approved again because of what's going to go through. It's going to be, they're reducing lane miles now. They're going to parkways. They're reducing lane miles. They want bikes. They want trails. They want walkways. That doesn't move commerce across Minnesota. And we need to make sure, as we well know in southern Minnesota, that transportation is so important. But the overall just taking government, they want to increase the size of government, and they think they want to oversee everything. I believe in local control as a mayor. We need, people like you and mayors and township. I was just at a township meeting last night out in Shieldsville. That's the local control. That's what we don't need a state bureaucracy coming in and telling how each little city should run exactly the same, or each township should be the same. That's up to local control to decide how someone in southern Minnesota may be so different than someone in the suburbs, and that's not what's happening right now. It's just a total growth of government, and that's also the frustrating part. So you hit a nerve.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, and being on the agriculture committee, I just want to just give you a little ray of hope, because the voice that you guys brought up on that helps us. And Senator Putnam is the chair, and Senator Jasinski mentioned if we get the majority, then we can do, we can have the chairmanship. But if we don't, or we don't right yet anyways, what you guys did when giving us that information, and Senator Putnam stopped a lot of that stuff because of the information he got, because the House wants it. They press harder, they have a bigger majority, and they are more aggressive, extreme. And Representative Ginsburg talked about that not having the voice of agriculture or Greater Minnesota, because they don't really have anything. So Senator Putnam's from St. Cloud, so that's, but he's trying, he's on tours, and he has another one on Thursday, and I've gone with some of them. So Commissioner, whichever one of them, but Christopherson, if you want to follow up, I can give you more details on that, but there is some hope there with what's going on. So we did stop there, and then I know that our committee had a lot to do with that, but you guys' voices helping us is really important, so keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. It's 10:28. We'll take 2 minutes and thank our representatives and senators for coming today, and the rest of our dignitaries that are here, obviously.
Imagine that.
All right, it's 10:43. We'll resume where we left off. Well, actually, it might be something new, but here we go with Land and Water Resources. This is to approve the final hearing notices and set the final hearing date.
Thank you. We need to approve 3 final hearing notices and set 3 final hearing dates for 3 individual ditch systems. So as we had talked, we mentioned we do each individual ditch as a separate hearing notice and final hearing time. And the first one is County Ditch number 26. I have a final hearing notice that was prepared by Frankie Noonan, and it specifies on the final hearing notice that the final hearing date would be September 20th, 2024 at 10 a.m. in this room. Look for a motion to approve the final hearing notice and set the hearing date of September 20th, 2024 at 10 a.m. 26.
I would move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Krause, second by Commissioner Milbreath. Any discussion on that?
And we can do that all in one motion, both actions?
For County Ditch 26.
I just want to specify you are in one motion, and that is the intention. Okay.
Yes. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries for County Ditch 26.
The second public hearing notice and public hearing date and time was for County Ditch 32. And that public, or the final hearing time would be for September 20th, 2024 at 10 a.m. in this room as well. Date and time is listed in the notice of final hearing before you. So I would look for a motion to approve the final hearing notice with the stated date and time.
Make that motion. Even though these are separate actions, do we have to have a time lapse between them? No. Run it at 10, okay.
There's the language in there as well too, is or thereafter as the agenda allows, it just can't start before the posted time.
Great. We do have a motion, is there a second?
There is.
Motion by Commissioner Milbreath, second by Commissioner Walter.
So this is the way it's advertised, right? So if I'm in,
And we will also send this to each individual beneficiary within the system.
will you tell them in the order that they'll be in, so that the person that's in that third ditch doesn't come right away at 10 o'clock? Or is it not that much time?
These should be, they're small systems and they should be hopefully non-controversial, so they should move through on a.
So it won't take an hour apiece, you know? Yeah.
Should not.
Okay.
Maybe. Any other discussion on that? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Next is CD 47.
That was the third and final hearing notice for County Ditch 47. And that also specifies the date and time of September 20th, 2024 at 10 a.m. in this room. And look for a motion to approve the final hearing notice.
So
We have a motion, is there a second? Second motion by Commissioner Walter, second by Commissioner Christopherson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Consent agenda is next. Approval of the bills, transfer of funds for the wheelage tax, transfer of funds for solid waste investment. Looking for a motion. Motion. Is there a second? Motion by Commissioner Milbreath, second by Commissioner Christopherson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next are your action items, our contract 812405, final acceptance.
Morning. Yeah, so this is to close out or accept the work and approve final payment for Scott Construction and contract 812405 for bituminous seal coat. This year we quoted about 20 roads, or 20 miles of county roads, sorry, not 20 roads. The original contract amount was a little over $512,000. There were no contract changes or revisions. And the final amount of work certified is $507,046.40, so roughly 99% of the original amount. And we do owe Scott Construction $66,041.93 as final payment. So, work and authorization of and 100% wheels checks money.
I would move final payment. Motion, is there a second? Second. Motion by Commissioner Christopherson, second by Commissioner Milbrandt. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you. Is that what? So thanks, Jeff. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Next is Safe and Secure Courthouse Grant Initiative. Good morning.
Good morning. As I passed out to you a little earlier, again, my apologies, I don't quite have the rhythm down, but I will be in sync by next week in September. As you may be aware, the courthouse, courtroom, and security staff have been working on a grant application. This grant application is due on the 26th, and it's an application that I'm writing with the assistance of the committee. And so you have in front of you a proposed letter of support, as well as information about the piece of equipment that we are proposing to ask for funding to purchase. And I just wanted to know if you had any questions. I don't know if you've had this conversation.
Right. About the equipment. Not the equipment, just the Constitution.
Just the whereabouts?
Yep. I was hoping that.
This is actually the one to check.
So this is to a company, you may be aware, we had a system assessment done last week with a report that was submitted and with recommendations. And those recommendations, this grant money won't be available until probably first quarter, I would say January of 25. So there will be things, I believe, that will be done beforehand, and this is to accompany what those other conversations are. So I'm just doing the grant writing. I'm not necessarily, that's my involvement with the committee as a grant writer. And I know that Commissioner Harveth and Michael have been involved in those conversations, as well as Sheriff Dulles. So.
Mr. Chair, per Commissioner Mildred's questions, that's certainly something we can follow up with Mike or anything from CISA. They would be really well poised to be able to answer that. I'm sure the Sheriff can add some insight too for the constitutionality part of it too, just navigating through the restriction of firearms in public spaces as we go through that process. And just then the reminder that even if this is awarded, we'll still come back for acceptance. So the board would still have further insight into this process too.
Yeah, just for the board's info, that the meeting that we had that day was kind of back and forth about whether we applied for this grant or not. And I think after some discussion, we said we would apply for the grant even though we're possibly not ready to have this.
And this is for like a bag scanner at an entry point. So yes, because it was a quick turnaround, us finding out about the grant, short time frame. It's a short amount, it's only $500,000. It goes to counties of greatest need. Our particular county, we were like the only one, at least in Judge's court system, that doesn't have one in active use. And so this is just, what can we do to help move it forward? So we're hoping it'd be nice to get advantage of those grant dollars.
So you're just looking for a motion to move it forward, the grant forward, correct?
And proffering the applicable awarded, if granted, you would still have to come back for your acceptance of it. And just to clarify, there's like a half a dozen other things that the board will have to talk through as it pertains to this whole conversation. Where the scanner would be relevant, a single point of entry for the courthouse, those are all things that still have to be discussed with you. This is just trying to meet the timeline of this grant submittal and have the opportunity to get some funds if all of this goes forward, and that's still an effort.
Yeah, it's time sensitive. Right, you got to have this in by when? What was the date?
Monday the 26th.
Right.
So the committee will be meeting again on Wednesday, tomorrow. I'm hoping to present to them a draft of the application. It's a pretty simple application. So that's the rest of my day today working on that.
Commissioner Walter.
I'm supportive of this effort. We know that our courthouse is not as safe as it needs to be, and this is a step in the right direction too. And it looks to me like this is a piece of equipment that we can figure out how to use now and probably figure out how to use better later. I would make just one note, and this is an idiosyncrasy. My name has a capital B in it. And so if you want what you send in to match other places that people might see that, I want it to be right.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So I will send the digital copy to Beth and make that correction.
It's minor, but blame Josephine.
I appreciate that, thank you.
I just want to add for clarification too, with the quote, it's reference the bag scanner and a little bit down towards the bottom, and also reference the metal walkthrough metal detector as well. So it's actually both pieces of equipment that's included on that.
Right. All right, looking for a motion to move this forward.
Move it.
Is there a second? Second. Motion by Commissioner Walter, second by Commissioner Milbreath. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Next is administrative updates.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be brief. Most of this can carry forward to our next touch point. You have handouts for both HR and EDA. Put together a nice summary for you of the last couple of weeks of activity. The one thing I'll just highlight there, she can give a little bit more robust update in the 9-3 meeting. We've had a lot of really good feedback already from communities that Tina's been meeting with, and just the overall presence and support they've been really appreciative of. So, of course, brings a lot of knowledge in the world of grant writing, and just the overall community and economic development conversations have been really well received so far. So just wanted to reflect on that for a moment with you, and thank you again for the support there. But other than that, unless there's specific questions, I'll defer to our next meeting.
Questions for Michael? Anyone? Okay. Everyone has a human resources update. I saw it. I had it. I did write it. Right. Perfect. You good? Good. Anyone else have anything that comes before this board? We're going to forego commission report. You did, if you want to.
Can I just add something? I would just like to continue my short conversation about monuments. And I looked into that and did some talking to a few people, and also talked to Michael as far as finding the monuments, as going and looking for the section corners, and that's what we're doing already. And if with talking with budget, looking at the budget, consider putting some money away for us to continue working on the section corners, which would help us maybe in the long run if we wanted to look for another grant to extend it further. And then possibly think about having a fund or a reserve put away if there was a constituent that went out as we're going around finding those section corners, if there was a constituent that needed some survey work done to find, and they had to go back, the survey company had to go back and find a section corner, that there could be a resource to pay for just finding that section corner from the county, and then they could continue doing their own survey for, but we want, that would extend us to find those section corners faster as we move through the county. So, because we've ended up with certain situations where a neighbor had to find the section county or the section marker. And then you have the neighbor next to him, hey, I gotta get some stuff surveyed too. It's gonna cost me a lot less since you found the section corner and did yours. So that would even the playing field out by just finding those section corners and moving forward in that type of situation. So just wanted to put that out there.
And in that context with our previous conversation in terms of trying to capture dollars this year and set aside for future projects, happy to factor that into the process, even if this is a multi-year effort regardless, right? So we can certainly continue to plan for that by starting to build that fund over time. And then if the determination is we're going to try to take on a township at a time, or even getting more specific within a township, that's something staff can certainly do.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Anything else to come before the board? If not, I would look for motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. Motion by Commissioner Castaldo, second by Commissioner Milbrat. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, right?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Adjourned at 11 o'clock.